Hundreds of terrorists are walking the streets of Britain. The stark warning from the man who used to be the country's top policeman. Sir John Stevens attacks those who fail to understand the brutal reality of the world we live in. Also tonight. Under fire, Labour's threat to hospitals which don't meet their targets. But is it because they're worried about their own pre-election campaign? Ban the bad behaviour from television. Are children imitating the footballers they follow? And flying start. Fisichella triumphs in the first Grand Prix of the season. Hello, good evening. He may have retired as Britain's top policeman, but his warning today about the terror threat facing Britain couldn't have been graver. Sir John Stevens' remarks weren't the first, but they were the hardest hitting. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, last week suggested hundreds of terrorists could be stalking our streets. Then the current head of the Metropolitan Police, Ian Blair, added his voice to the warnings. And today, Sir John Stevens accused anyone who opposed the government's new anti-terror plans of failing to understand the true horror of the terrorism Britain faced. But opponents of the plans have dismissed his criticisms. To Harry Smith now at New Scotland Yard. Harry.
For years, he's been Britain's top policeman. He says he's seen all the evidence, he's read all the intelligence reports. He knows there will be a major terrorist attack in this country, but he's concerned that the rest of us don't take that threat seriously enough.
The signs of heightened awareness are all around for us to see. There have been countless warnings of terrorist attacks by suicide bombers using car bombs and chemical weapons. But Sir John Stevens, recently retired Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, in a newspaper article today launched an unprecedented attack on the human rights lobby and defended the government's attempts to keep terror suspects under guard. Writing in a Sunday newspaper, he says the main opposition to the bill is from people who simply haven't understood the true horror of the terrorism we face. Some of the reports that crossed my desk in the last few months alone made my hair stand on end. His remarkable intervention comes just days after the Prevention of Terrorism bill scraped through the House of Commons by just 14 votes. After the law lords ruled that detaining suspects in Belmarsh prison without trial was illegal, the new bill seeks powers to detain suspects at home. But critics question Sir John's assertion that there are up to 200 Al-Qaeda terrorists walking the streets of Britain.
Clearly there is a threat. There's a threat from Islamic militants to the UK. But the idea of 200 fully trained up, fully active Al-Qaeda terrorists wandering around our streets is frankly somewhat ludicrous. It's certainly not something that I've ever heard said by any of the senior intelligence people I've spoken to, either in this country or overseas.
Well, I'm very disappointed at the tone in particular, but also some of the content of his piece. But then, to be fair, I remind myself he is no longer a serving police officer. He's entitled to let rip, as the News of the World has said. He is now, after all, a columnist for the News of the World.
Sir John's remarks come just as the new terrorism bill goes to the House of Lords, where it faces stiff opposition. If it doesn't become law, the Belmarsh detainees could walk free, a prospect Sir John describes as madness. Harry Smith, ITV News.
ITV News has learnt that there are now serious concerns within Labour about the way their so-called pre-election campaign is going. The worries among senior Labour ranks emerged as Tony Blair himself admitted that his personal standing could be an issue. Many observers feel Labour's campaign has struggled in the last few weeks against a revitalised Conservative Party. Let's go to our political correspondent Angus Walker in Downing Street. Angus.
Yes, Tony Blair is just 60 days away, most people believe, from the election and the chance to become Labour Prime Minister for a third time. But a variety of Labour sources have told me today that they think that achievement will now be a lot more difficult than many people may have believed, because they say Labour's pre-election campaign has been so far a flop. And to cap it all, the Prime Minister himself now admits he's got a problem with his public image. Tony Blair's personal popularity was key to Labour's landslide in 1997 and again in 2001, but now he says his standing is an issue. The war in Iraq, the fierce rows over the hunting ban, and internal squabbles over tuition fees and foundation hospitals have cast shadows over his image in recent years. In a newspaper interview, he says, "I am an issue. I always will be, and if he was no longer making a contribution, he would quit a government that was under a constant barrage of attack." The comments come amid some concerns within Labour that the party's pre-election campaign is in trouble. According to one former Labour minister, it lacks gravitas. There are now calls for urgent help from Labour's former election chief, Gordon Brown, who was replaced in that role by Tony Blair's ally, Alan Milburn.
It looks very much as if the Labour Party has lost its touch for campaigning. I don't think that's an accident, given that the man who sort of designed the sort of core bottom of the election campaigns for the last two elections isn't involved in it. But that's Tony Blair's fault.
Today, 10 days ahead of the budget, Mr Brown told Labour's Scottish Conference that the economy needed to be at the centre of their campaign.
Every week and in every part of the coming campaign, let us tell people the truth about the economy. It's a British economic record. Let us be proud, it is also a Labour economic record.
Last week's row over Margaret Dixon's cancelled operations was sparked by the Conservatives, who claim their campaigning is rattling Labour.
In the last month, as you may have noticed, I've been compared to a flying pig, to Fagin, and to Shylock. Something tells me that someone out there is just a little bit frightened.
At his party's spring conference this weekend, Lib Dem leader Charles Kennedy said the scrabble for headlines by Labour and the Tories demeaned politics.
This campaign has had all the trademarks of spin that simply turn people off the political process.
With many Labour MPs urging Tony Blair to bring back Gordon to save their party's campaign, expect to see the Chancellor make the most of riding to the rescue. It may be time for a new deal.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Well, if the battle over Margaret Dixon's shoulder helped Labour lose the initiative on health last week, the government did their best to regain it today. They announced plans for hospitals to lose funding for any delayed operation which isn't rescheduled for within a month. The Conservatives said the proposals amounted to nothing more than a fine for hospitals that made patients wait too long. Here's Jason Farrell.
Labour has argued that Margaret Dixon's repeatedly cancelled shoulder operation was being used by the Conservatives to unfairly condemn the whole NHS. But today came a government policy aimed at helping people just like Mrs Dixon. Under new proposals, if a hospital cancels your operation, it's got 4 weeks to give you a new date, which must be at the earliest opportunity.
If the hospital cannot give you that within 28 days, then you must be offered one at another hospital. And finally, coming into effect this year, which is the talk of fines in this morning's press, the money will follow you to whichever hospital you go. In other words, the hospital that's cancelled the operation will lose the money. It's not going to get paid for operations it hasn't done.
But the Tories say that taking money away from struggling hospitals will make things worse.
At the moment, hospitals are actually having to turn people away because of financial problems. We've got cancellations of operations, we've got ward closures taking place because there isn't enough money. And then the government turns around saying it's going to fine those hospitals if they don't actually get their waiting lists down. It just doesn't add up, it makes no sense, and this is a daft proposal.
Today's announcement came as it emerged that Great Ormond Street Hospital has been forced to cancel operations due to budget constraints.
Under the current financial system, we get a certain amount of money at the beginning of the year to treat the number of patients that everybody expects us to need to treat. What we've done is to treat more patients, and therefore that envelope of money has effectively run out.
Under the new proposals, budget allocations will be more transferable, meaning one hospital's gain will be another's loss. Jason Farrell, ITV News.
Well, let's go back to Angus now. Angus, how concerned are the senior Labour Party officials you've spoken to about this pre-election campaign?
Well, what struck me, Felicity, was this almost universal chorus of bring back Gordon, and they really saying that they wanted some more oomph in the campaign, and the Chancellor, who could talk about Labour's economic record, would do that job for them. And bear in mind, these were some people who were saying this through extremely gritted teeth. So it has to be said, this is good news for Gordon Brown, because of course straight after the next election the speculation will begin about who is going to take over from Tony Blair. The Prime Minister, as we know, has said he won't stand for a fourth term. So here we have the Chancellor being offered on a plate, it seems, the prospect of being the saviour of the Labour Party, of coming to its rescue just on the eve of the election campaign, with the oomph required, the oomph being demanded from some MPs, and being seen as the man who wins a third historic term for the Labour Party. Good news for Gordon Brown, and I think we can expect to see a lot more of him in the next few weeks.
Angus Walker, thank you. Violent tackles, swearing, dissent, red cards. Senior teachers said today that many aspects of live televised football were bad for young children and should only be shown after the 9 p.m. watershed. The Secretary Heads Association believes badly behaved footballers are setting children a poor example. And it says many players need to learn how to live in a civilised society. Damon Green reports.
And Rooney. Teenage England star Wayne Rooney thought he should have won a penalty. When he didn't, the result was an angry confrontation with the match referee. But it's bad behaviour like this on the football field which teachers say is to blame for bad behaviour in the classroom, and they want to see it banned from the airwaves.
I think the problem is that children need to be taught to behave in a civil fashion, and their parents and their schools work hard to do that. They look up to these players. When they see them behaving in this way, it's not surprising if that tends to undo the good work that their parents and the schools have done.
But on London's Hackney Marshes, where the game's played for fun, parents can't agree whether TV games affect their children's behaviour.
I think it's a good idea, because my boy, he plays football, he's just started playing football, and I've noticed where he started playing now, he started picking up on swear words.
I think it's a big problem because they worship the footballers. It's a massive problem, and you can see referees struggling to control children in children's games.
No, I'll go and watch my children play at weekends, and they play fine. No violence, no swearing, it's not allowed.
Campaigners want new rules to ensure that violent or abusive behaviour is only shown after 9 o'clock, when younger children are less likely to be watching. But that would mean a massive change in the way the game could be broadcast. Critics of the game say the negative impact is worse because it comes directly into your living room. But that impact is exactly the reason why the game attracts so many millions in advertising and sponsorship, and the reason why the game itself will be unwilling to pull the plug. Damon Green, ITV News.
Some other stories making the headlines tonight. America is said to be considering new economic sanctions to pressurise Syria to withdraw from Lebanon immediately. Syrian troops are due to be pulled back to the eastern Bekaa Valley, still in Lebanon, after talks starting tomorrow. From the Bekaa Valley, they'll be withdrawn to Syria. The body of the Italian Secret Service agent who died shielding the Italian hostage, Giuliana Segreina, was returned to Italy today. She claims American forces targeted her deliberately because Washington opposed Italy's policy of dealing with kidnappers. And Turkish police used tear gas and batons against a group of women protesters accused of participating in an illegal Women's Day march in Istanbul. There were violent scenes as police chased demonstrators down the streets. 59 people were arrested.